this video is going to be about interviews for biology. So I'm Dr Beth Mortimer and I'm a research fellow in the Department of Zoology.
Hello, my name is Dr Jonathan Green and I am a lecturer in the Department of Zoology as well, and a junior research fellow at New College. So when you come for your interview for biology, you will be having interviews with at least 2 interviews in separate colleges. And so the aim of what we want to do today is to kind of give you a taster of what those interviews are like, and give you a bit of a feel for what we're looking for, how you should best use that time as well. And then you'll see a kind of live interview in action. So I'll hand back over to Beth now.
So of course, as you already know, we look at the rest of your application, but in the interview we're particularly looking for evidence of your interest in biology. So can you tell us about something that's written on your personal statement or other topics that interest you in biology? We'll be looking for that. So secondly, your ability to engage in conversation about biology related subjects. So of course we're going to ask you questions, but also feel free to ask questions to us as well and engage in that two-way discussion about these biological topics. So thirdly, how you respond when given additional pieces of information. So it may well be that we don't give you much information at the start, but we may give you more as the interview goes on. So we'll be looking at how you respond to that. And linked to that then, how you respond when you are confronted with things that you don't immediately know the answer to. It's not actually about the right answers, but we're looking for evidence for how you think through problems. So that's what we're looking for during your interview process. And what we're going to do now is do a mock interview as an example of the types of questions we might ask you to see how you think. Welcome to this interview for biology. So my name's Dr Beth Mortimer. I'm a research fellow in the Department of Zoology, and this is my colleague.
Hi Sophie, I'm Dr Jonathan Green. I also work in the Zoology Department.
Great, so what we're going to do, nice to meet you. What we're going to do today, Sophie, is just ask you a few questions to gauge your interest in biology and how you think through biological topics. So don't worry at all if initially you don't know what the answer is. If you want more time, feel free to take all the time you need and ask us questions. And it's all about knowing how you think about things. So feel free to think out loud for us. So your first question, just a very general one. Why are you interested in studying biology?
I'm mainly interested because I feel like it's such a broad science with so many applications in different areas, and I feel like especially where we are now, it's really exciting in terms of like with how much other disciplines have come on, like so the impact of like computing in biology, etc., and all these different I think it's just a really interesting time to be a biologist because there are so many different applications that you can be considered for like solving the world's problems, like what's been going on with COVID, as well as like climate change. I think it offers some like very novel perspectives.
Great. So yeah, Sophie, following on from that then, I wondered if you could give me some examples of sort of biological advances that have really excited you in the past year or so, things that you've heard about and excited about.
Yeah, of course. So I mean, not that COVID was something to be excited about, but like I feel like COVID's been really interesting in terms of because you do some like immunology and disease work at school and how vaccine programs, but it's been really interesting to see this play out on like a global scale, I guess, with seeing not just the science behind it, but also like people's attitudes towards things which you kind of learn as like distinctly good, or this is what happens, and seeing how it's actually all worked out. And also in terms of the different solutions for vaccine development, and also like in terms of kind of different ways of solving the virus. There's been some really interesting like publications and stuff about how they've like attempted to de-optimize like codon usage for COVID, which I thought was a really interesting way to go about trying to trigger immune responses.
Excellent, thank you.
Great, so what we're going to do now, Sophie, is we're going to move on to your first detailed question. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to try and share my screen. So fingers crossed, all going well. You should see a PowerPoint slide. Okay, can you see my screen at all?
Yes, I think so.
Great, is that now full screen?
Basically, yeah.
Great, okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play this video twice. And what I'm going to ask you to do after it's played through twice is just describe what you see in the video. Okay? Right, I'll start playing it now. Let me know if you can't see the screen move for any reason. Okay, that's the end of the video. I'll play it again for you, Sophie. Okay? Just try and unshare my screen. There we go. Hopefully I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Great. Would you like to describe to me what you saw in that video, please?
Yeah, okay, so the video appeared to show a herd of elephants kind of in their natural habitat. It looked like this, it looked like an African savanna. And it showed them grouped with the adults around the outside and with the younger, more vulnerable members in the middle, which because they were kind of hidden from view until you saw the elephants start to move a bit, and then at the end you have a complete breakaway of so some of the adults and some of the young then follow off in different directions. Something seems to almost startle them. But at the start at the start of the video, it really did look as if they were showing kind of just herding, almost like protective, slightly showing. I felt it seemed a bit like the adult elephants were almost in a kind of aggressive stance, I want to say, because they were moving their legs up and down. They were like making themselves look a lot bigger. They were hiding the more vulnerable, and so there might be something that had set them on edge or scared them. Maybe potentially a predator or something like that.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so let's go back to what you said about the startle response. Was there anything specifically that changed in their behavior over that video that's made you say about the startling?
Yeah, it's just the main difference where at the start they were all kind of huddled with the adults facing in outwards, which implies some sort of protective stance and behavior, and they're flapping their ears quite a lot as well, which is I think it can be used to like as a way of cooling down, but in that particular setting of how they are facing, it looks more like it's making themselves look a lot bigger than.
Yeah, but can you summarize the changes in behavior over the video?
Yeah, so they're all standing outside, but then suddenly something must happen, maybe a visual cue or an audio cue, which makes them all startle, where they suddenly break out of their protective herd unit into individuals running away.
Okay, great. So we've got that kind of breaking up of the herd. And as you said, you got some behaviors at the beginning that perhaps change throughout. So at one point, they kind of freeze and look around, and they kind of hold their ears out a lot more stationary before moving out. So you've started to think there in your answer about what might explain that behaviour that you've observed. So what do you think might most likely explain that change in behaviour?
Do you mean the change where they all start to break away?
Yeah, so what do you think might have happened?
For it to be something that big, I'm inclined to say it could be like the viewing of a predator, but considering how big elephants are and they're in such a large group there, I'm not sure how likely it would be that it is, because I feel like they could defend against it because most of the predators are a lot smaller than an elephant or even like a pride of lions. So it might be more kind of something that they're hearing, so more audio based. So it might be like, oh, it might have something to do with poaching. Actually, it could be like a gunshot, for example.
Okay, great.
Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, you've mentioned a couple of different types of cues there then. So you said it might be a visual cue, might be an acoustic cue. And you've mentioned both kind of predators and perhaps humans as well as being the kind of source of that. Do you want to pick one of those? And can you tell me how you might design a field experiment to test that hypothesis? So for example, if you thought it was a visual cue of a predator, how would you test whether that was what was causing the change in behaviour?
So you would, I guess, have different groups where you'd look and see whether it is in fact. So you could have like, I don't know, you could make a representation, I guess, of the predator, like a kind of life-size cutout or something, and you could place this in their area and see how long it takes for them to notice it and what their response is, to see whether they display this breakaway behavior.
Great, so you could have a manipulation where you could try and recreate that. What about any controls? We need to think about any other comparison groups here?
Yes, so you could do a control of where you don't have this and where you don't have the let's pretend it's like a lion like manipulation that we're doing. You could have one where you don't have this, but then you could also have one where you have different types of animals. So you might have a zebra, for example. So maybe if they display the same behavior when you have like a different representation there compared to none at all and the one that you're intending to look at.
What are the benefits of having both of those controls?
So one of them, so the one where it kind of shows whether there's the one where you don't have a cutout, for example, that kind of looks at whether there is a difference at all of whether it happens even when there's nothing there. And then where you have one for, say, a zebra, for example, instead of where you're looking at lion, it's asking, is there something about the lion or the zebra particularly which causes this response, or is it just anything in their vicinity that they can pick up that looks like another animal that's causing them to startle?
Great, really interesting, Sophie. So actually, if I'd played that video to you with the sound on, what you would have heard about 10 seconds into the video would have been the sound of bees. Ooh. So how can we link that to the behaviour that we've seen in the video?
So if it's bees, I guess that maybe it's to do with where they're standing as well, because they were standing underneath a tree. So it might be that they're standing quite aggressively because they can just hear the sound, which they might associate just through learnt behaviour with being stung and that inflicting a pain response, which they want to avoid. So they might stand there, and then one of them might get stung, which might cause all of them to break away, because it might be like a herd movement where one jumps out of position and they all think that the other one's seen something, so they all then break out.
Great, excellent. Do you find that surprising? That it's being...
Slightly, it's not what my mind initially went to, but I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophie. So yeah, the elephants actually will retreat to the sound of bees. And as you've said in your answer there, it is something that they've learned in terms of they can actually be stung kind of within their trunk and within their ears. So they are actually quite vulnerable to these bees, and they do retreat to the sound of it. Well, thank you very much for your responses, Sophie. That's all that I want to talk about with this, but now I'm going to hand back over to Jonathan, and he's going to ask you a different type of question. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to show you a series of images now, and we're going to work through a biological problem. So I'll be sharing my screen the whole time. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So we've gone down into the depths of the ocean. And of course, here we have lights from a submersible inspecting a wreck. Now, other than these lights that's produced by this, this submersible, is the ocean in the depths entirely dark, do you think?
I think it's pretty close to being almost entirely dark, mainly because I've seen some images of various organisms that live down there, and lots of them don't appear to have very well developed like optic sensors, I guess. But at the same time, I'm sure there might be some light that permeates down, but probably not a lot, I think would be the answer.
So you know, at a certain depth, no, there's no downwelling light anymore. But there is another source of light. So you're exactly right. A lot of organisms have lost their eyes, but a lot of them actually have quite large eyes. So there is some light from somewhere that they're picking up and using. Can you think what the source of that light might be if it's not the sun?
Could it be light created by other organisms? Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And what do we call that? Do you know?
Fluorescence?
Wow. So bioluminescence.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are some nice examples of bioluminescence on so fish and squid. So overwhelmingly in the deep sea, if animals produce light, it's blue. Okay. As shown by these creatures. Can you think for me why bioluminescence tends to be blue?
It might be to do with the cones that might be present. So the cells which pick up the like cells in the eyes of most of these marine organisms that are able to pick up the light. It might just be the sort of color which the majority of these marine dwelling creatures have. So it makes more sense if they're trying to be picked up by other creatures. Just might be evolutionary.
Yeah. Okay. So I certainly agree that if lots of receivers are sensitive to blue light, then that's what you should produce. Now, why it should be blue in the first place, though, like why they should have sensitivity to that. So a big advantage of blue light is that it the shorter wavelengths it travels much further in the water, so it's a better signal in terms of transmission than longer wavelength light, like red light, for example. Okay, so that neatly brings us on to a very strange organism. This is the head of a dragonfish called Malacosteus. And hopefully you can see just below the eye, there's a little red mark. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, this, in fact, is a light-emitting organ that emits red light. So having told you that almost everything in the deep sea is communication is via blue light, and as you've correctly guessed, visual sensitivities are to blue, the blue part of the spectrum, then why on earth would a fish produce red light?
It could be to do with it might be a method of predation for this, because you said that the red light doesn't travel as far, so potentially this the dragonfish, was it might hunt by more ambushing, and then, or like sudden startlation where it just lies pretty motionless, and then as soon as something comes close to it, which might then be able to see the red light and might be visually stimulated by it, so it might move closer to it, try and see what it is, or just maybe try to, and then this dragonfish might just suddenly come out of nowhere and ambush it and eat it.
Okay, so you're definitely along the right lines. It is an ambush predator, but for that to work well, obviously you don't want to reveal your presence at all. So this red light doesn't work as a lure. In fact, what's happening is that the fish is producing a red light that only it can see. Okay, so it's lighting up the environment immediately in front of it. And if there's another sort of little prey fish close by, it can hone in on that and catch it, but without that prey fish ever knowing that it's there, because it can't detect the red light. It's like a predator style hunting strategy. Okay?
Okay.
Now, if we look at the jaws and the teeth, what do you think this fish is specialized to catch? Very generally, what kind of prey?
Probably some other fish. Judging by its, yeah.
Judging by what? Sorry, what would you say?
Oh no, I was just saying it seems to have quite a large like jaw, which looks like it can detach slightly. It's massive, and it's got really big teeth as well, which implies that it needs like quite a firm, and quite a few of them implies it might need quite a firm grip. So it's probably not like kind of more detritus that it's eating. It implies it might be catching live prey.
Excellent, excellent. And that is exactly what you'd think, isn't it? So here is the dragonfish in a drawing extending those jaws to catch some smaller prey fish. Now, the interesting thing when researchers have gotten hold of these fish occasionally and looked at the stomach contents is that actually a large proportion of what they eat isn't these small fish that they seem very well designed to catch. Okay. In fact, they are also eating a large number of these small crustaceans, these copepods. Okay. And they're really inefficient at doing that. As you can imagine, copepod, you know, the jaws aren't built for it. The gaps between the teeth, behind the jaws and everything. So they're inefficient copepod hunters, but they do go around eating a lot of them. Okay, I'm going to leave that with you for a second, and we're going to look at something a little bit different. So, we've met a fish that produces red light. Yeah. And we've discussed the fact that almost all organisms are sensitive to blue light at that depth. Now that dragonfish, the cones in its eyes, the proteins that dragonfish can produce itself to put in those cones, they are not sensitive to red light. Okay, so just like all the other fish, in terms of what the dragonfish itself can produce in its eyes, it has a sensitivity to blue light, but not red light. Okay. Okay, seems weird. Do you recognize this spectrum at all? Does this ring any bells?
Somewhat. It looks like a lot like an absorption spectrum. So it's just showing like what percentage different wavelengths of light are absorbed.
Exactly. Yes, it is an absorption spectrum. Perfect. Could you even hazard a guess what pigment this absorption spectrum might be for?
Well, it seems to be absorbing really strongly at the blue and red region, which implies that it's like emitting at the green region. So maybe something that. in that green region.
Can you think of a pigment that does that? That's quite
chlorophyll.
Yeah. This is the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll. So I want you to take everything we've talked about a dragonfish that produces red light, but its own eyes can't see red light. It hunts fish, which it seems very well designed to build, but it actually also eats lots of these tiny copepods. And here's a close-up picture of a copepod. I wonder if you can take all this information for me together and tell me what's going on with this system.
Let me have a think.
Of course.
Well, it might be something to do with the fact of like the copepods might have different visual sensitivity, which might be why they seem to be more attracted to the red light than we said the other marine organisms are. But the fact that we're talking about chlorophyll is interesting because I can't see the dragonfish having anything to do with chlorophyll.
Yeah.
So it might be that the copepods, was it, the myriapods? They might have something to do with the chlorophyll, in the sense that maybe they feed on some sort of organism that contains chlorophyll, so some sort of plant, and they might take this up. They might be able to take up the chlorophyll pigment potentially.
Perfect. Yeah. So you're exactly right. So copepods forage partly on plant matter, contains chlorophyll that is then inside them. So what do you think is the final connection then? We've looked at the absorption spectrum for chlorophyll, and you told me it absorbs strongly in the blue and the red.
Yes.
Okay, and we know that the dragonfish emits red light.
Yeah.
But in terms of the proteins itself that it is able to produce, it can only absorb blue light.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Okay, no worries. No, you've done very well indeed. And so the final little sort of explanation for this is that the dragonfish actually uses chlorophyll. It puts chlorophyll inside its eyes, which then allows it to absorb the red light that it's emitting. So effectively, the dragonfish need to eat these copepods in order to be able to eat, in order to be able to see to eat. So it's a weird circular.
It's very cool though.
Yeah, it is very cool. Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now.
Cool.
Great, well done, Sophie. So that is the end of your interview. You'll be happy to hear. So normally we would tell you about what's coming up next and whether you know what kind of your next interview arrangements are along those lines. But in this case, this is all that you've got for today. So thank you very much for your time, and it was lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So in this little section now, we will, having seen the mock interview with Sophie, we'll just reflect on some of the things so some of the sort of hints and tips for how to kind of succeed in these interviews. So I suppose we opened with some general questions to Sophie about her interest in biology, and that's something that you can expect. That's very typical. We want to gauge applicants' interest in the subject, of course. To an extent, of course, we're helped very much by the personal statement, and so you should definitely expect the interviewers to ask you questions about your personal statement. Make sure everything that everything that's in that statement are things that you're prepared and happy to talk about, in terms of things that you might have read or experience you might have got in different places. And do be prepared to go into some detail. Okay, we want to hear your we want to hear some detailed thoughts from you on things like the aspects of biology that you find really interesting, why exactly that is, and what's really motivating you to come to study this subject. Okay, I'll hand over to Beth now.
Great. Yeah, in terms of the detailed questions, obviously Sophie did very well, and it's worth bearing in mind that she did have a year of biological study already under her belt when she was asking this. So as examples of that, she was giving us some scientific terms, which we might not necessarily expect an A-level student to know. For example, in my question, she was talking about associative learning, so that's a specific type of learning. But in general, what she was very good at was asking for time to think, and do that in your interview. If you need time to think, ask for time to do that. I think what she didn't do, which can be very helpful, is also to ask questions. So if you're not sure what the question is asking, or if you want a bit more information, so for example, perhaps in Jonathan's question, she could have summarized what she'd already talked about, or she could have asked a question where she really wasn't sure. In my question, you'd notice at one point I kind of interrupted her a little bit. We don't generally like to do that, but we will do that if time is getting short. So for example, I specifically wanted to know about changes in behaviour over the question. So I did have to interrupt her, remind her again what I'd asked. So make sure when you are answering questions, where you can, try and answer the question specifically rather than going off talking about other things that are interesting. And don't think that it means anything if we interrupt you. It's usually because time is short and we need to make sure that we stay on topic. But otherwise, on my question, I thought she did a really good job going through the specific questions I asked. And again, it's just thinking out loud. I wasn't judging on right or wrong answers from the questions I had, but how she could think through the problem out loud and deal with that new information. Right, handing back to Jonathan for anything else to add.
So I would say that as Beth described for her own question, that all of those things apply to my own as well. Sophie did an extremely good job. It doesn't matter that there's a final sort of level of wrapping off of the question that we didn't quite get to. These questions are often designed to have quite a lot of steps to them, and they can go off in different directions. So it's really just about being able to sustain a good discussion and, as Beth said, to ask questions, but really crucially also just to take the time to think and just try to take a moment to be calm. And you can ask for a bit of time. You can ask your interviewers to rephrase or clarify their questions. Yeah, and I think other than that, yeah, that's probably all the tips from me.
Great. In terms of how this might differ between different tutors or different colleges, generally speaking, you will get these types of detailed questions from the different tutors. But as well as just having maybe one general question and two questions here, there may be more than that depending on the college and the tutor. But generally speaking, you'll either be given an object perhaps, or a graph, a piece of data, a video. So all of these are different starting points for discussion. But as we've said at the top, when describing what we're looking for, it's really your problem solving ability to engage in conversation with us and how you deal with that new information, or if you're presented with something that you don't know. So that's generally how the interviews go for biology.